So we're going to talk about modeling multiplying integers. So we're going to talk about using the counters. Now remember, in class we were saying that the positive is yellow and that the negative is red. So on here, we're just going to pretty much say if it's shaded, it's negative. If it's not shaded, it's positive. But we can still like draw them. So let's think of, remember when you learned multiplication back in like third grade, you learned that multiplication is like groups. So what's another way to say 2 times 6? We could say 2 groups of 6. So if I was going to draw that, that would be having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2 times, right? And of course, what is that answer? 12. So to write this, we could write this in multiple ways because we can write multiplication in different ways. We could say 2 times 6 equals 12. We can use it with a dot, 2 times 6 equals 12. Or with parentheses, 2 times 6 equals 12. So what would be another way to say 2 times negative 6? That would be 2 groups of negative 6. So I can show that with 2 groups of negative 6. Now that again is saying 2 times negative 6. I can also use, sometimes you'll see 2 times, and I'll put it in parentheses, the negative 6, just to keep the multiplication and negative symbol kind of away from each other. But I can write that with like 2 times negative 6. What do I have in total? There's 12 negatives, so times negative 12. 2 times negative 6 equals negative 12. 2 times negative 6 equals negative 12. Now notice that this right here, it kind of looks like that's 2 minus 6, but because there's nothing right here in between the 2 and the parentheses, that does mean multiplication. So it means 2 times negative 6. Okay, so now I want us to talk about, and I do actually want to go back and mention this. When I had a positive times a negative number, my answer is negative. That is very important. So a positive times a negative is a negative. Okay, so we have talked about that the negative sign, we can say negative, but it also can mean the opposite of. So if I said negative 3 times 4, I could really say that is the opposite of 3 groups of positive 4. Okay, so if I said 3 groups of positive 4, but it's the opposite of that, right? So 3 groups of positive 4 would be 4 in 3 different groups, right? But the negative sign means the opposite of. So when I have negative 3 times 4, that's really saying the opposite of 3 groups of negative 4. So I'm going to show the opposite of that. So what is it going to be for the opposite? That means I just flip it all over and it's going to be negatives. Okay, and again, I'm getting this from this opposite of, it means negative, and then 3 groups of 4. So what does it equal when I have the opposite of 3 groups of 4? How much do you see total? There's 12 negatives. So negative 3 times 4 equals negative 12. Notice that is a negative times a positive equals a negative. Important thing right there. So now let's show 4 groups of negative 2. 4 groups of negative 2 means 4 times negative 2. So I'm going to draw 4 groups of negative 2. When I have 4 groups of negative 2, what do I have? Negative 8. Now let's say I want the opposite of that. If I'm going to take the opposite of that, how do I show that I want the opposite of that? With a negative sign. So the opposite of 4 groups of negative 2 would be negative 4 times negative 2. So what's the opposite of that? I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to have positive. So when I had the opposite of 4 groups of negative 2, what do I end up with? I now have positive 8. So what we're seeing here is that negative 4 times negative 2 equals positive 8. I can write it with a dot. But what I am seeing is that a negative times a negative is a positive. Again, very important concept right there. So just referencing what we have learned here so far, when we did this, we had negative times a negative is a positive, a negative times a positive was a negative, and then a positive times a negative was a negative. Now we're going to show some multiplication with number lines. So we're gonna look at this, and when we have like jumps like this, that is gonna represent multiplication. So when I'm doing this, jumps are your groups. So I'm gonna look to see, do I have jumps? How many jumps? And then how far is each jump? So looking at this first example, I have 1 jump, 2 jumps. So that's 2 groups. And then how big is each jump? There's 3 in each jump. So that's 2 groups of 3. So what am I modeling? 2 times 3. And where does it land? Where it lands is your answer. So that is showing 2 times 3 equals 6. Or I could write it 2 times 3 or 2 times 3 equals 6. So you're always starting at 0. And I'm going to count how many jumps and how far each jump is. So let's look at this next one. This time I have 1 jump, 2 jumps. So there's 2 groups. And let's look at each jump. Each jump, I'm going backwards 3. So that is negative 3. So 2 groups of negative 3 is what I am modeling. And where does that land? Negative 6. So what I'm showing is that 2 times negative 3 equals negative 6. And again, I can write it multiple ways. So let's do another one. This time, how many groups are there? There's 3 groups. How many are in each group? There's 2, 2, and 2. So I'm going to have 3 groups of 2. So that is showing 3 times 2 equals, and it lands at 6. So 3 times 2 equals 6. So now we're going to model our own. We're going to make one on our own. So model 4 times negative 2 on the number line below. That 4 is going to tell us the number of jumps. The negative 2 tells us the direction and how far each jump is. So I'm going to start at 0, and I'm going to go 2 backwards in a negative direction for each jump. So I will start, there's 1 jump. Now I'm going to do another jump. Another one. And another one. That's going to give me 4 jumps going 2 in a negative direction each time. And where do I land? Negative 8. So this is showing me 4 times negative 2 equals negative 8. And remember, I could write it without the parentheses also. It does not make a difference. So now what we're going to do is we are going to write an equation for each model, and then draw a number line for each expression. So let's look at this first one. How many groups are there? 1, 2 groups. How many is in each group? There's 3 negatives in each group. So that would be showing 2 times -3 equals, how much is their total? -6. Now I'm going to do the number line next for 3 times -3, and then you're going to do the last 2 on your own. So 3 times -3, that means 3 jumps, and they're 3 in a negative direction, right? So I'm going to start at 0. It's going to go 3 in a negative direction, and I'm going to have it 3 times. And where does it land? -9. So my answer to 3 times 3 is -9. You're going to do the last 2 on your own. Go ahead and pause it, do the last 2, and then unpause it to see if you are correct. Here's what you should have gotten. I hope this explains modeling multiplying integers with models.